This Sunday, the Biden agenda at risk.
We got 50 people. We can't lose one.
Progressive Democrats holding firm on spending bills.
We're not leaving one part of the agenda behind and giving up on the idea of childcare, paid leave, community college, health care.
Moderate Democrats hoping to trim the cost.
I understand people are concerned about the top line dollar amount.
And Republicans vowing to stand in the way.
This is government-run socialism. Every one of us is opposed to it.
Will Democrats reach agreement or fail and risk sinking the president's agenda? My guest, Democratic Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey. Plus the border crisis.
I've seen just the desperate looks of the people just trying to get processed. I mean, it's a completely dire situation.
That encampment of migrant Haitians finally cleared.
There are no longer any migrants in the camp underneath the Del Rio International Bridge.
But questions remain about where the migrants were sent, their treatment, and how to secure the border. I'll talk to Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Plus the booster rollout.
I must do what I can to preserve the health across our nation.
Rochelle Walensky overrules her own CDC advisory panel and recommends Pfizer boosters for workers at risk. And new revelations about what President Trump was doing on January 6th and the efforts being made at the Trump White House at the time to overturn the results of the election. I'll talk to the authors of the new book, Peril, Bob Woodward and Robert Costa. Joining me for insight and analysis are Amy Walter, editor-in-chief and publisher of the Cook Political Report, Eddie Glaude Jr. of Princeton University, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell, and Meghan McCain, columnist for thedailymail.com. Welcome to Sunday. It's Meet the Press.
From NBC News in Washington, the longest-running show in television history, this is Meet the Press with Chuck Todd.
Good Sunday morning. When Democrats won control of the White House, held the House, and narrowly grabbed the Senate in that Georgia upset, they embraced some very large goals that carried some very large risks. President Biden proposed a vast and ambitious progressive agenda, despite those narrow majorities in Congress. Much of it packed into two bills, an infrastructure bill and a $3.5 trillion domestic spending bill. But even as the president faces a series of challenges that have hurt his own poll numbers, Democrats are fighting amongst themselves. Progressives and moderates are arguing over the size and scope of the $3.5 trillion spending bill, with each side threatening to sink it without compromises from the other. John Podesta, who worked for Presidents Clinton and Obama, warned Democrats if they failed to reach agreement, quote, "It would signal a complete and utter failure of our democratic duty and a reckless abdication of our responsibility." In other words, for Democrats, on this one, failure is not an option. At stake, simply the agenda of the president, of their party, who desperately needs a win. But Democrats have little margin for error in the House and no margin for error in the Senate, and no clear path yet for making good on the president's promises.
This is a process, and it's going to be up and down. That's why I don't look at the polls.
President Biden, who ran on bringing competency back to Washington, is facing a string of setbacks: a chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, a migrant crisis at the border, the ongoing COVID pandemic, and now a brewing fight on Capitol Hill between progressive and moderate Democrats over his domestic agenda. The president's job approval rating is now underwater in most polls.
Remember, I said it's going to take me a year to deliver everything I'm looking at here.
On the border, the camp in Del Rio, Texas, that was once packed with 15,000 migrants, mostly Haitians, is now gone.
There are no longer any migrants in the camp.
On Thursday, the U.S. Special Envoy to Haiti resigned in protest over the administration's inhumane, counterproductive decision to deport thousands of Haitian migrants back to Haiti. And Democrats expressed horror over the images of agents on horseback chasing migrants in swinging leather reins.
The nation has witnessed over the last 48 hours some of the most horrific things that we've seen.
This is abhorrent.
It is outrageous. I'm pissed.
Of course I take responsibility. I'm president. To see people treated like they did, horses barely running them over, people being strapped, it's outrageous. I promise you those people will pay.
The president also faces the threat of a shutdown. Republicans are refusing to help keep the government open and solvent, threatening legislative sabotage as a political tactic.
The debt ceiling will be raised, as it always should be, but it will be raised by the Democrats.
And Mr. Biden is attempting to negotiate a political truce between progressive and centrist Democrats, at odds over the size of his domestic spending package and the timing of a vote on a bipartisan infrastructure bill. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is promising a vote this week.
Have a little patience. Follow it. See it unfold. It's very interesting. We're very encouraged.
But progressives are threatening to withhold their support until they have reassurances on the size of the proposed $3.5 trillion domestic spending package.
The reality is the bill coming up and not having the votes is not something that the Speaker will be willing to do, and we don't have the votes for it.
It's still a shame, truly is a shame, that they're using that as a hostage towards this.
Former Obama White House Chief of Staff John Podesta is calling on progressives to pare back their ambitions, writing, "The political reality is clear. We will not secure the full $3.5 trillion investment." And Podesta is warning centrists, "You are either getting both bills or neither, and the prospect of neither is unconscionable."
It's politically catastrophic if we don't move forward with these bills at this time.
And joining me now is the Democratic Senator from New Jersey, Cory Booker. Senator Booker, welcome back to Meet the Press.
It's really great to be back on.
It's good to have you in person. We don't, and we're getting there. John Podesta earlier this week wrote a memo that said, he's basically sending a memo to both sides of this argument, moderates and progressives, like, look, you're going to have to come together. And to progressives, he said, you're going to have to accept the reality that $3.5 trillion is going to get pared back. Do you concur?
Well, first of all, I don't like how this has been characterized as progressives versus moderates. This is Joe Biden's bill. And as he said to me in the Oval Office and a handful of others, he goes, I've never really been a progressive. This is about seizing what is a once-in-a-generation opportunity, like those who built the canals and the railroads, like those who built the incredible Eisenhower Highway Act. If we miss this opportunity, every dollar that we shrink it is a dollar that we're not investing in our future, and it's unfortunate. So how this plays out, this is Washington. I'm sure there's going to be some kind of compromise. But to me, to compromise repairing our electrical grid, or to compromise ending being the only nation on the planet Earth of industrial nations that doesn't have paid family leave, that has its costs, and it's going to make America lose the boldness of the possibility of jumping forward as a nation.
Is there a sense here, though, that maybe, there's an old saying that all of our parents used to say, your eyes are bigger than your stomach, or the political eyes bigger than the political reality? Meaning, like, look, you can only do as much as the 50th senator.
That is 100% true. And I think a lot of times we're losing sight of what we've already accomplished under this president. I was with a person from the black media who just said to me, oh, well, voting rights and police reform, what's he done for the black community? I go, what are you talking about? I said, we've cut black poverty, child poverty, 50%. We are the first president stepping up on black farmers, maternal mortality, getting lead pipes out of the ground. Biden has racked up one of the greatest agendas of accomplishments. It's unfortunate people don't see that. And if we do a $3 trillion bill, a $2.5 trillion bill, I'm going to push for as big and bold as we can, but it will be a historic investment in America. And unlike President Trump, who racked up $8 trillion worth of debt. And where did it go? Mostly to the wealthiest in our nation. This president, with the child tax credit, has given the biggest middle-class tax cut in our country in generations. So I'm proud of what Biden's doing. And as we sat in the Oval Office, we passed, moderates were coming out, progressives were going in. Yeah. And he is really doing shuttle diplomacy, trying to land this.
Well, and I guess the question is what's with it looks like distrust from my perspective, in that you wrote this letter along with 10 other senators. It's reinforced this idea, hey, don't bring up the bipartisan infrastructure bill in the House until the larger reconciliation bill is done. Why can't you trust centrists or moderates, however we want to classify the folks, that they'll be there? Why not pass this on Monday, put some points on the scoreboard for President Biden, which right now helps the whole party, and trust that the moderates will be there for this?
I don't think it's a matter of trust. I think it's a matter of, I've been around here, this town now for 8 years, watching the best of intentions not manifest into something real. We were told that we see this as one package. The president, as recently as last week, has said, don't separate this. This is one package that we're looking at. And so I just want to make sure this is not about a bunch of people who are battling it out in Congress. This is about the American people. And to get half of this done and leave mothers who are looking for affordable child care, Americans who are looking for lower cost prescription drugs, to leave people like that on the wayside, families that need that child tax credit, to leave those folks on the wayside is unacceptable to me. So I've seen the best of intentions. I want a more real guarantee.
Well, You just don't believe the word's not enough?
No, again.
I mean, that's what it comes down to.
No,
it's basically saying that the Joe Manchin's word's not enough here.
Look, I have been looked in the eye by people in this town, and they meant it sincerely. There was honor in them saying it. Hey, Corey, we're not going to get this in such and such a bill, but we'll get to it. Well, sometimes that get to it turns out to be a year, the next Congress, or what have you. I'm sorry, when you have the leverage, you use the leverage, as long as it's not about ego or partisanship. Yeah. For me, it's about the communities in this country. And by the way, independents, 60, 70% support what we're trying to do. Republicans, on some, if you break out the policies that are in these bills.
I want to get to that, breaking out the policies.
Yeah.
I'm having flashbacks to healthcare. I heard the same thing.
Yes.
Hey, the individual parts are really popular.
Yes.
Okay. The
yes.
individual, yes, they are. Should you be dealing with them in an individual piece here? I understand the situation of reconciliation, but you could be debating each part of this bill one at a time here, and you might actually get your message to the people that this isn't just a money grab.
Yeah, I tell you, I was a mayor during the healthcare debates, and it took years before suddenly the Affordable Care Act, call it Obamacare. No, a lot of people on the right don't like it, but now the Affordable Care Act pulls above water for every group, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats. So again, there is movements and moments. This is a moment for America to go big. We didn't tell FDR, hey, break it into constituent parts. We didn't tell Eisenhower.
But he did do it in different parts, though. That's the difference, is that both LBJ and FDR did this in pieces.
And
now, they had bigger majorities.
I was about to say, they had much bigger majorities.
But they did it in pieces.
Yeah, this is realpolitik. And the reality is right now, we will have very small opportunities. You know what it looks like for the next Congress to move this big. People elected the President of the United States to do bold, big things that will change America. This is our moment. We should seize it.
All right, but during the presidential primaries, which you were a part of,
yes,
didn't the Democratic voters essentially send the message, do what's possible? They didn't pick the progressive candidates.
Yeah, they picked a moderate guy who has a great track record for getting big things done in the Senate. And that's why Joe Biden was joking with us in the White House. He's like, this bill is not a progressive wish list. This is an American wish list. I said bipartisanship, when you poll the parts with Republicans, what he is doing is wildly popular with the Republican Americans who want child care and affordable college and affordable daycare. Yeah. They want to make sure that we're meeting the challenge of climate change. So again, to characterize this as some, remember, Bernie Sanders' first wish list was a $6 trillion package. This is significantly less than that. And the other thing is, the Washington math, you've got to get upset about this. Donald Trump's tax cut was a $5 trillion bill. People called it a $2 trillion bill because $3 trillion of it was paid for in the wrong way, getting rid of our state and local tax deduction. This one is a zero bill. We're paying for the whole thing, but yet we're using different math to make it sound bigger and more ornery.
I don't want to let you go without asking about your take on why police reform didn't come to fruition. Here's what Tim Scott said. He said, Democrats said no because they could not let go of their push to defund our law enforcement. Is that correct?
No, again, why are we descending into partisan name-calling or partisan corners? These are two guys that sat down, that worked very hard over 9 months, got the FOP to endorse a compromise bill, and I never imagined we would get FOP leadership to come on board. The International Association of Chiefs of Police, who said, yes, our profession's in trouble. Right. The families were with what we were proposing. It didn't work.
Why do you think Senator Scott's using this language, though? Because you've been very diplomatic. He's not being as diplomatic. Why?
I love him. I send him grace all the time. He is a friend of mine. The reality is I've gotten big things done in this town in this space with Lindsey Graham and Chuck Grassley and Donald Trump. We got big things done to cut.
Do you think McConnell didn't want him to cut this deal? Do you think there were others above him that was basically like, do the best you can, but?
I promised the families we're going to get something done. I'm still at work. I'm not throwing accusations at either side. I do think this town has got to learn, all of us, that to try to play the singularly blame game. Right. I accept responsibility. We didn't get it done. I haven't stopped working. We need to lift the frequency of this town, especially on issues like this that all of America knows. Biggest demonstrations in this country's history for change. They want change from the federal level.
It's quite notable, though, that you're not going politics here. Senator Scott is. Just saying.
Again, I've learned a lot over the last 8 years, and that's not the way to get things done in the long run. And the families deserve. We're going to still see videotapes of unarmed African Americans being killed. We've had tragedies in this country we've all witnessed. We've got to start getting things done. And the wonderful thing about it is police leaders understand it as well. We've got to get back to the table eventually and get big things done.
Senator Cory Booker, it's good to see you. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
On Friday, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas announced that all the Haitian migrants who had gathered under a bridge in Del Rio, Texas, have been cleared from the area. More than 12,000 were released into the United States and allowed to request asylum. Mayorkas says 8,000 returned to Mexico voluntarily, and as of Friday, 2,000 were expelled to Haiti. Still, the images of white Border Patrol agents appearing to manhandle Haitian migrants drew sharp criticism from Democrats and from President Biden. And Secretary Mayorkas joins me now. Mr. Secretary, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thanks for having me, Chuck.
Let me start with the decision to send 2,000 Haitian migrants back to Haiti in this current circumstances. In hindsight, was that a mistake?
No, it wasn't, Chuck. That is the exercise of a public health imperative. We're in the midst of a pandemic. The Centers for Disease Control has a Title 42 authority that we exercise to protect the migrants themselves, to protect the local communities, our personnel, and the American public. The pandemic is not behind us. Title 42 is a public health policy, not an immigration policy.
But these folks didn't come from Haiti. They came from some other places in South America. Should they have been sent somewhere else?
So we are working with other countries, Chile, Brazil, other countries in South America and the region. These are Haitian nationals. Some of them don't have documents from the countries from which they just left. So they are subject to removal. They are subject to Title 42 expulsion, and we work with the countries that receive them. In fact, in Haiti specifically, we've contributed about $5.5 million to ensure there's safe and humane resettlement there.
Right, but they haven't. Some of these folks hadn't been there in over 5 years.
That is indeed the case, and they're Haitian nationals, and they're subject to removal to a country that is able to receive them.
Let me ask you about Title 42. Is that an authority you still want to have?
That is an authority that the Centers for Disease Control has determined to still be necessary given where we are in the arc of the pandemic.
I want to ask you about the behavior of CPB and Border Patrol. Clearly, a lot of Democrats are upset. The vice president did something that I had never seen before with a cabinet member. They put out essentially a readout of a call that she had with you, and it seemed to say that the implication was that it was a dressing down of sorts. How did you respond to her about the performance of Border Patrol?
So the performance of Border Patrol is the subject of an investigation, and the facts that are adduced in that investigation are going to be determinative. But I think the entire American public correctly and necessarily were horrified by what the images suggested. They conjured up such a dark past that we have not entirely put behind us.
Did President Biden go too far when he said those folks are going to pay? Are they guilty before they're in investigation?
Oh, absolutely not. The investigation is independent. We know how to conduct an independent investigation. I think the president echoed the sentiments of the public in terms of what those images suggest.
There is some Democrats in this town that thinks CPB is a rogue agency. What would you say to that? I'm sure you've heard that privately.
Oh, I couldn't disagree more vehemently. I'm intensely and immensely proud of the men and women of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. In fact, in Del Rio, Texas, I saw them act heroically. You know, what those images suggest does not reflect who CBP is, who we are as a department, nor who we are as a country.
Now, the Border Patrol Union said that using horseback, that is a training that they get. Are they right?
Oh, the Horse Patrol serves an incredibly important function. Horses can traverse terrain that might not otherwise be covered. In fact, horses are often used to not only assess a situation, but to actually help people in distress. CBP personnel have saved many lives on horseback.
So those images you think are something that, do you think those images misconstrued their actions? Do you think that it's going to turn out their actions were actually on the up and up?
The facts are going to be adduced in the investigation. The investigation will determine the facts. It's an independent one run by the Office for Professional Responsibility. In fact, I directed that the leadership of that office direct the investigation to ensure its both integrity and quality.
You, I know, are getting a lot of heat from members of Congress on both sides of the aisle. I want to play for you a clip from Congressman Henry Cuellar, who's a Democrat representing the border down there. Here's what he said about the current situation.
President Obama and Secretary Jay Johnson, they treated the immigrants, the migrants with respect and dignity, but at the same time, they followed the law. If they're not supposed to be here, then with all due respect, you got to send them back.
Look, you were a deputy in that administration too, so you've been at this. What is the same and what is different compared to the surges you dealt with at DHS in 14 and 15 versus what we're seeing today?
So this is not new. Remember, in the summer of 2014, we had a great number of unaccompanied children arrive here, and there were people who called for us to do more than we did, and there were people who called for us to do things differently than we did. Getting hit from both sides in the matter of immigration is no surprise. We are in the epicenter of the country's divide, regrettably, and we do what the law requires, what our humanitarian mission requires.
But do we have enough resources down here to deal with the surge that's currently happening? Because we thought this was seasonal. Turned out it's not seasonal this year.
So we have an incredible ability to deploy resources to meet the challenges that we face, and we actually evidenced that quite powerfully in Del Rio, Texas. In less than a week, we addressed a population of 15,000 there, and now there are none.
Do you accept the idea that we have a crisis at the border?
I am focused on mission, Chuck, and the challenges that we face and our ability to meet those challenges, and I am incredibly impressed with the men and women who do so.
Do you think we have the ability to meet these challenges right now, or does the law have to be changed?
Oh, I think, I think we meet the challenges, but we are working in a completely broken system. And as to that, there is unanimity in Washington and in the country. I've never heard anyone say that the laws in immigration are well structured.
If we get more Haitian migrants, is the only solution going to be that they're likely to be deported back to Haiti?
No, as you mentioned at the very outset, Chuck, there are a number of them that are expelled under the Title 42 authority, the Public Health Authority, and then there are others that are placed in immigration court proceedings and have the ability to make their claims to an immigration judge.
Are you at all concerned this will serve as a magnet for more migrants to come?
Oh, I don't think that is the case at all. In fact, 8,000 Haitians returned to Mexico over the past week.
Do you think that's because we're sending people back to Haiti?
I can't speak for them, but I do think they made that journey, which we admonished them not to make, to not put their lives and their funds in the hands of smugglers who exploit them.
Secretary Mayorkas, I appreciate you coming on, sharing the administration's perspective.
Thank you, Chuck.
You got it. When we come back, we're learning more about what all the president's men were doing to help Donald Trump during his final days in office to overturn the election and to stay in power. Bob Woodward and Robert Costa of The Washington Post join me next. Welcome back. We've been learning more about the backstory to the January 6th insurrection and all the events around it post-election. The Biden White House, by the way, is now considering handing over information about what President Trump was doing while the Capitol was being ransacked that day. The House committee investigating January 6th issued subpoenas to 4 Trump allies, including his last chief of staff, Mark Meadows, and his on-again, off-again political advisor, Steve Bannon, asking them to hand over their records and appear for depositions. And in Bob Woodward and Robert Costa's new book, Peril, we learned that a lawyer working for President Trump wrote a memo outlining a way for Vice President Pence to invalidate the results of the election, essentially sending it to the House and hand the presidency back to Mr. Trump. That revelation is one of many in the book Peril. Bob Woodward and Robert Costa join me now. Gentlemen, welcome back to Meet the Press. Bob, I want to start here with sort of a big picture question, which is, did you guys chronicle an aborted coup?
Well, I mean, there were attempts. And, of course, the core of Trump's argument is the election was stolen. And what we found in our work is 2 of the biggest Trump allies, Lindsey Graham and Senator Lee from Utah. I mean, this is the core of Trump's support in the Senate, investigated these claims and discovered that there was absolutely nothing there. And what you see Trump and his lawyers doing, these kind of legal somersaults that just hold no water with Trump's allies. And, that you can't convince Lindsey Graham and Mike Lee that the election was stolen or that there was some fraud means what we found, a weakness in the case, not just a weakness, but zero evidence.
You know, Robert, there were so many near misses here. I want to look at this excerpt that you guys have between a conversation between President Trump and Vice President Pence at the time. He's trying to get him to work, and he says, "If these people say you had the power, wouldn't you want to do it?" Trump asks of Pence. "I wouldn't want any one person to have that authority," Pence said. "But wouldn't it almost be cool to have that power?" Trump asked. "No," Pence said. "Look, I've read this, and I don't see a way to do it." It feels as if we weren't sure the role Mike Pence played, but was he the lone bulwark here?
The story of January 6th is not just that day. It's the days before, all of the movement afoot inside of the Oval Office. On January 4th, John Eastman, the author of the memo you cited here, he was in the Oval with the president, pressuring Vice President Pence, look at this memo, try to throw out alternate electors on January 6th. And that meeting, which was the ultimate temptation of power, a president to a vice president the next day, January 5th, Vice President Pence, who spent 4 years trying to do the bidding politically for President Trump, he said he didn't have the constitutional ability to act. This was the brink of a constitutional crisis on the eve of an insurrection.
Had Mike Lee indicated support for this pathway, do you think the vice president would have changed his mind?
Throughout
How important was that?
Oh, it was critical, as Bob said, for Senator Graham, Senator Lee, and other conservatives, even former Vice President Dan Quayle, to say you can't do anything here, Vice President Pence, except count the votes. But there's so many historical counterfactuals. What could have happened if Pence went in a different direction and just walked away?
Bob, the roles of Lindsey Graham and Mark Meadows here, at times it looked like they were sort of enabling President Trump's wishes on this election, and at times they seem to want to steer him away from this. Is that the case? How would you characterize their roles?
Well, there's a lot of ambivalence here, but we quote conversations between Senator Graham and Trump in which Lindsey Graham said to Trump, "You effed up your presidency," at one point, just a couple of months ago. And Trump hung up on him and then called him back a day later, and Lindsey Graham said to him, "I would have hung up too." And the core conclusion that Graham has is you lost a close election. Face it. Notch it back. And now we have Trump out calling Senator Lee and Senator Graham. Somehow they folded. Trump is attacking them because they found the truth. And the truth is this was not a stolen election.
And it really wasn't even that close.
No, it wasn't even close.
Yeah.
But we felt an obligation to look at that, and that's how we found these memos that were written. Giuliani wrote all these memos to Lindsey Graham saying all kinds of fraudulent votes, kids voted, dead people voted, and then they looked at this. It's not there.
It's debunked. You've covered President Trump since the beginning of sort of that staircase, Robert. Do you think he really believes he won? Or do you think he really believes, because I feel like the truth sort of showed up in one of the quotes in the book when he said, if I don't keep fighting, I'll lose my base. He thinks his political base is because he fights the establishment, not because of any policy enacts, right?
I've learned covering President Trump and covering politics, it doesn't really matter sometimes what people think. It's what they do. And to assume nothing. In 2015, a lot of people said Donald Trump won't run. He'll never win once he announced in 2016. Well, he won. And he lost in 2020. He wants power back. Our reporting in the book shows these rallies don't get a ton of coverage, but he's out there with this Churchillian-type language. We'll never surrender. We'll never give in, whipping up thousands of people across the country. And the most important thing is not just his personality as the story. He's influencing the Republican Party across the country to now run for office, to be secretaries of state, to be election officials. 2022,
He's bending
2024.
the party to his will, isn't he?
Certainly.
Bob, the final question I have for you, since we noted here, and the puns were necessary, All the President's Men, Final Days, in some ways, you put both books into one, in this one. Trumpian versus Nixonian. Define the two.
Well, Trump has, it's what is the presidency about for the average voter out there? And it is evaporating because Trump is staking everything on this stolen election claim. And even we were able to get information about the then CIA director, Gina Haspel, someone who's been very silent, an expert on instability, unstable regimes. And she concluded in November that what is this, a right-wing coup? Right. That President Trump is like a child, a 6-year-old, having a temper tantrum?
So does this go beyond Nixonian? Trumpian is now bigger. To be Trumpian is worse than to be Nixonian.
Well, we were in a dangerous national security moment, which we document. And nationals, if things had gone crazy with China or Russia or Iran, we discovered these countries were on alert. And, that's the edge of war and miscommunication, a pretty frightening time.
And as Bob and I have talked about, when Nixon gets on the helicopter in '74, he goes away to California and stays there. Not the same dynamic this time with President Trump.
No. Well, there's a reason I think you guys have an aptly named book called Peril. Let's hope we're not still at peril. Thank you both. When we come back, progressive Democrats versus the moderates. And the only thing at stake, just the presidency of Joe Biden. Panelists next. Welcome back. Panelists here. Amy Walter, editor-in-chief and publisher of the Cook Political Report. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell. Eddie Glaude Jr. of Princeton University. And Meghan McCain, columnist for thedailymail.com. It's good to have a McCain back on Meet the Press.
Thank you
very much
nice
to have you there. So let's start with what we've learned about what's going on in Congress. Leanne, this is your turf. I'm sure you caught the number Cory Booker said, which is sometimes, look, whether it's $3 trillion or 2.5, and I thought, the number's moving. What's going to happen this week?
The number is moving, and the reason it's moving is because they know that they can't get $3.5 trillion. That has been made clear. But there's problems with the number, too, and that is that people like Senator Joe Manchin, who have said they won't support $3.5 trillion, also won't give a specific number. And so Speaker Pelosi is trying to negotiate legislation with the moderates, with the progressives, and with people like Senator Joe Manchin in the Senate who aren't specific on what they want. So it's a Rubik's Cube, it's a Venn diagram, and it's every sort of like crazy mathematical thing that they're trying to fit together. And it's extremely complicated. And my sources say they don't know how it's going to play out yet.
Pythagorean theorem in here at all? And, Amy, it was remarkable to me that Cory Booker was like, I don't. He didn't say I don't trust, but he then described a situation that he says, I don't trust.
I know we're not supposed to do this, but before we came on, we were chatting about this. And we were reminded of the number of times where the House has felt like they were hung out to dry, that they passed something, whether it's climate, whether it's back in the 90s, the BTU tax, only to find that the Senate.
This has happened to House Republicans, too, right? This is a Senate and the House do this to each other no matter who's in charge.
It happened with the health care bill. Right? They took that big vote and then watched the Senate go.
Right.
To me, where we are, though, is so much driven by, that phrase that Mike Tyson once had, that everybody has a plan until you get punched in the mouth, right? And the plan back in the spring was, by this point, we would be free from COVID. The economy would be roaring back. And, of course, the momentum that would bring to this legislative process. Democrats would come together. This would be, not as big of a lift as it is right now. Now what we have is a president who's desperate for his party to give him momentum, right? He's not bringing it to the table.
Meghan, I want you to play a reporter here for us because you may have the best sense of Kyrsten Sinema. I know you have a pretty good personal relationship. That's the frustration Democrats say. They don't know what Joe Manchin wants. They don't know what his bottom line is, and they don't know what her bottom line is. How would you describe it?
Well, I mean, politically in Arizona, I think that's why people like her so much. Just anecdotally, conservatives in my life really like her because, she's holding the line for conservatives in a lot of ways. The question I always have is, for people like Joe Manchin, if it's not him, it's going to be a Republican. So this distaste and this, outward hostility towards moderates in the Democratic Party surprises me. I also was shocked by seeing Senator Booker talking about sort of openly this distrust between progressives and moderates. candidates. How the Democratic Party ultimately threads the needle, I don't know. But I will say that President Biden ran on being a moderate, as you said. He ran and won with the help of independent, centrists, Trump-wary Republicans, and he is not governing as one. The Build Back Better agenda is the most progressive, modern agenda of all time, up to $5 trillion, and it's not polling well. So I think I'm just confused as why they're doubling down on something that is cratering in the polls right now.
Eddie, I'm just curious. What do you? No. But should President Biden be leaning harder? Are you surprised he's not leaning harder to get this bipartisan? I would think he would need a signing ceremony yesterday.
Absolutely. President Biden understood that he was in a moment where he needed to be a transformative president. It feels, Chuck, like we're in a political Groundhog Day, right? We've just experienced a pandemic. We're still in it. Close to 700,000 Americans are dead. The pandemic has revealed it was like a blue dye into the social and political body of the United States. And that alongside of the threat that Trumpism presented to our democracy. It revealed all sorts of troubles across every aspect of our society. And our response bears a striking resemblance to the very logic that informed how we've governed for the last 40 years. So I understand this is a political show. We have to talk about the politics of it all.
We're stuck.
But damn, it seems to me we're talking about a figure, a number, 3.5 trillion.
Right.
America's in trouble. And what are politicians doing but haggling over, it seems to me, the elements of an ideology that has revealed itself to be bankrupt. That's my view.
Yeah.
Back to Senator Sinema, I have reporting that says that out of all of this big reconciliation bill, there are all these different proponents, the thing that is most important to her is climate change. And why that is, so if things get scaled back, she wants climate change proposals to be included in it. But that gets back to the Venn diagram, because that's exactly what Senator Joe Manchin in this bill does not like.
By the way, the other talking point is, hey, this is zero cost. Okay, it's all going to be paid for? And what's that going to look like?
To me, this is the other big challenge for Democrats, as you pointed out in your interview with Senator Booker. There's a lot of discussion about the price tag. There's not a lot of discussion about the policy and how Democrats allowed this entire debate to be driven by, is it 3.5? Is it 2.5? Is it 1 point whatever, rather than what is the policy that we're trying to put forward? What's the name of this bill? We keep calling it reconciliation. We keep calling it the $1 trillion social package.
At least healthcare had a name, Affordable Care Act, even Obamacare, at least you do care. It's about healthcare.
No American knows what's in this. And when Senator Booker said, well, you take the individual pieces, people like it. Okay. But that's not what you're talking about right now.
Ultimately, though, until COVID's resolved, I think the politics for the president is going to be difficult.
Yep.
The COVID confusion doesn't help things.
Yeah, at all. I still don't know if I'm supposed to get a booster or not. The other thing I would piggyback on what you're saying, Amy, is that Americans may not understand this bill in its entirety, especially if you're an average American working, but they do understand inflation. They understand what happened in Afghanistan. They understand that their gas prices are going up. They understand that Christmas toys are going to be more expensive for their kids. And that is something that will be a deal breaker for candidates coming up in the midterms. And I believe your Cook report showed Virginia now officially a toss-up state.
COVID. In many ways, the reason why our Christmas presents are going to be difficult to have, supply chain.
Supply chain. And, every 43 seconds, an American dies. 1 in 500 dead from COVID.
We're going to hit 700,000.
Come on. It seems to me that there's some stuff on the table for us to deal with.
All right. Can't resolve this now, but I have to take a break. Up next, fight over abortion is heading to the Supreme Court. How Americans feel about abortion rights and the court right now when we come back. Welcome back. It's data download time. This week, the United States Supreme Court announced it would hear arguments on a Mississippi law that would ban abortions after the first 15 weeks of pregnancy, except in the case of medical emergencies. Now, the news was the latest bit of evidence that abortion and the court are going to remain big political issues in the months ahead. At the same time, the court is seeing a major shift in voter attitudes about it. In fact, as abortion and the Supreme Court get conflated, you're going to see the poll numbers change for the court. In fact, already you're starting to see it. I want to show you something here from July to September. As you can see, before abortion, we knew abortion was going to be front and center in the court. Both Republicans and Democrats had decent approval ratings of the Supreme Court. The right, happy with some of the business decisions. The left, happy with some of the social decisions and things like same-sex marriage and things like that. But as you can see, as abortion is heated up, all of a sudden you're seeing a partisan divide develop when it comes to the court. So let's go to the issue of abortion. Some new polling out this week from our friends over at Fox. Future of Roe v. Wade. Overturn it or let it stand. A whopping 65%, highest number they had found. And look at it by party. A majority of Republicans in this Fox poll said, let Roe v. Wade stand. And of course, a large majority of Democrats. Now, that's the big picture of Roe v. Wade. You start to get into a little bit of the details. An abortion ban after 15 weeks, and you can see the partisan divides grow a bit more. Overall, there's a plurality in favor of a ban of abortion after 15 weeks, 34% opposed. A large chunk, right, undecided on this issue. And you see the party line differences here on this. So this really is, in some ways, a line of demarcation when it comes to public opinion on abortion. And of course, all of that means what? To both parties, and especially Democrats, the choice of the next Supreme Court justice is being very important. Democrats now caring more about the next choice than Republicans. When we come back, even after Arizona's phony election audit found that President Trump lost the state again, Mr. Trump insists it proves he won. And so what is he doing? Calling for more so-called audits. Stay with us. We are back. So the Arizona audit, Megan, showed that
he lost by more.
He lost by more.
Yeah.
President Trump has not taken it very well. Last night in Georgia, he seemed to go after any Republicans that stood in his way. Let me play a little sound.
Raffensperger. I'm telling you, I think there's something wrong with him. And your rhino governor, Brian Kemp, who's been a complete disaster on election integrity. Governor Ducey was horrible. He was missing in action. We didn't get any help from Mitch McConnell.
So, Megan, Mitch McConnell, Doug Ducey, Brian Kemp, this conspiracy reaches pretty deep into stopping President Trump in his own mind, does it?
I don't even know how to talk about this because it is conspiratorial, insanity from the bowels of the internet. There is a segment of the Republican Party that believes it. I know people that think the election is stolen. It's the big lie that people are still believing. It's a huge challenge for the party going forward. But as Mitch McConnell recently said, I believe he called President Trump a horse that is out to pasture and should stay there, or a thoroughbred that should stay there. And if you look at polling against people like Governor DeSantis, President Trump does not have the stranglehold on the party that he once did. And I think it's college-educated women. Continue, sorry.
I kind of agree that you're right, except the party, Eddie, the party leaders publicly act as if Trump still has all of this power, right? Like she's not wrong. There is polling indicating that people, and please go away, but they're afraid to say it publicly.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, Governor DeSantis his popularity has everything to do with he's a version of Trump in some ways, in particular sorts of ways. But I think you're absolutely right that the base of the party is in lockstep with Trump. And what I heard in Trump's remarks last night in Georgia was, in effect, if we don't win, somebody stole it. If the results aren't consistent with the way in which I think they should be, then someone stole it. And that seemed, we heard it from Elder. It seems like it's going to be a strategy across the Republican Party these days.
Leon, there's not a Republican that will other than Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney right now, a House Republican that feels comfortable really going after him publicly, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The base of the party is still, even though Trump is not the same factor that he was when he was president, the base of the party is still beholden to him, and they are rabid about him. And Republicans, especially in the House, know that. They are afraid of primaries. They are afraid of being on the other end of Trump bullying because they know that will hurt them. Even in their gerrymandered districts where they're going to win a general election, it's the primaries that matter, and that's what they're worried about.
And to me, this has been the danger all along for Republicans, is a sense that we just don't anger him, just appease him a little bit, and it'll go away. It'll get better. Don't worry about it. It's not working. Yeah. And what I don't like that it's been called an audit, because that puts an air of legitimacy to it. It was not legitimate. The legitimate forces, the people whose job it is to say these elections were held fairly, have ruled. That should be the end of it. And so I don't think the point is to say we want to take every election we lose and say we won. The point is to undermine the integrity of the entire process. And once that's gone, I don't want to be the alarmist, But it is very dangerous.
Well,
and
that brings
scary.
me to this Robert Kagan column that everybody's been buzzing about. This is in the Washington Post, and I've been divided. Is it alarmist or is it prescient? Let me read a little excerpt. The Republican Party today is a zombie party. Its leaders go through the motions of governing in pursuit of traditional Republican goals. The party's main, if not sole purpose today, though, is as the willing enabler of Trump's efforts to game the electoral system to ensure his return to power.
I mean,
Is
nothing
it prescient or-
galvanizes Republicans right now than seeing what happened in Afghanistan, than seeing this giant spending package. I mean, the thing that can unite me with the biggest MAGA person in the world is the Build Back Better progressive agenda. So I do think while it's uncouth in polite society to say that you would be okay having anything to do with President Trump, there are people that will vote for anything except what's happening right now. And I agree with what you're all saying. I always consider President Trump like Godzilla under the water, and the sequel could easily come. But there really are people in the party that I think, at the very least, will put up a very good fight against him. And he is still very powerful in a lot of ways, but he is not the kingmaker he once was, as we've seen in primaries across the country.
The fascinating part about what you just said, Megan, is that it's a feature of the argument that Kagan is making. And that is that there's a loyalty to national party, a desire to own the libs, to define oneself over and against those folk that you do not want to govern. And so you're willing to make a certain kind of choice, a kind of Faustian bargain that unleashed this person into our body politic. What's fascinating, I think it's a bit alarmist. I disagree with the way in which he tries to disentangle the history of the Republican Party from Trumpism, but he's onto something, Chuck, and that is, I'm going to echo Amy, this is calling into question the very foundation of our democracy. If the body public if the people do not trust the process, we can't.
What are post-elections going to look like on November of 22?
Exactly.
Well, that's the thing. It's not about the past election anymore. They're still talking about the past election, but they're trying to delegitimize future elections.
I think that's the concern we all have, and it's sort of like, boy, I used to love a close election. Now I fear the impact of what unpacking that would be. Thank you all, but before we go, I want to let you know that we are kicking off our third season of Meet the Press Reports. It's where we deep dive into one subject. You can see new episodes on NBC News Now on Thursdays at 9 p.m. Eastern and anytime on Peacock. So, and by the way, today, to get you ready for the new season, you can see all 8 episodes of Season 2 from 2 to 6 p.m. Eastern on NBC News Now today. That's all we have for today, so thank you for watching. We'll be back next week, because if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.